Hello, I'm Arthur. Welcome to my lab. I'd like to show you the changes that I made to some of the parts for the awesome 3D printer design called Hypercube. That's a design of a printer that I built recently. It was designed by Tech2C, and really he did an excellent job creating this printer. And he was kind enough to share his design on Thingiverse, so I was able to reproduce his printer, and it's just printing awesome. I'm really happy with the printer itself and how well it prints, and it's just running 24/7 and printing all kinds of stuff. But there are some things that I preferred done differently. I just liked them a little bit different, so I decided to make some changes, and I'd like to show you what those changes are. First of all is the X Carriage. I really like captive nuts, so I've changed the design to use these inserts of the nuts to attach the X bearing, which actually is another thing that I'll show you later. But so these two bearings get attached through the nuts. And also, oops, some of those aren't tight enough, and nuts are falling out. I guess I'll have to glue them in. I've also added the nuts for the X end stop. So I had to enlarge this round part a little bit for the nut to fit in there securely. And my original design was just a round piece right here. But then I realized that this front part of this piece was hitting the XY joiner and was preventing the end stop from engaging. So actually I flattened this part, so now it's smaller, it's trimmed a little bit. Still there's a lot of plastic around the nut to hold it securely. Just this part is shorter, and now the end stop switch can engage like it should. So you just have to use the right length of screws to attach your X bearings, but there's enough room provided past the nut so that the screw can even go past it and sit in there securely. So that's one thing that I did. And then the hot end holder that goes on front of this X plate, I've also added nut inserts to it. Original design is with a screw recess, or a recess for a screw head, so that it screws in from this side into the X carriage. And so then if you, for whatever reason, if you need to remove the hot end with the whole assembly, you have to remove the front screws, remove the hot end, then unscrew these screws to then finally take off this part. With my redesigned part, the screws go in from the back, from where the belts are, so you just lift the belts out of the way and unscrew the screws, and this whole assembly with the hot end and everything else comes out as a one piece. Actually, I have this whole assembly ready to go. See, it's all put together and it's ready to be just slapped on this and attached from the back, and you're good to go. So if you need to swap out your hot ends, if you have a different hot end that you want to use, maybe different size of the nozzle or dual extruder, whatnot, all you need to do is, without disassembling anything, remove the 4 screws from the back, put the new hot end on, and reattach the screws. So I think that this is a pretty nice improvement. So that's these. The duct for the air cooling down the printed part. I really had a hard time printing the original design, which is printed flat on the print bed like so, and the bridges across this part just were not coming out right on my printer. So I've decided to print this duct upright like this, and to make it easier to print these arms, I added this support underneath them with 45-degree angle, so I can just print this air duct like this, and it prints very nicely. I'm very satisfied with this, except for this one that got a little bit bent here at the top. I'm not sure why that was. Probably I used too hot of temperature for the filament, so I'll have to reprint this one. But still, much better than printing it flat. Now the Z smooth rod holders. Again, I really like captive nuts. I really like how you can just put a screw in when you're ready. Just put it in and just start driving it in without worrying about having to hold the other side with the pliers, and maybe this nut jumping out of the pliers, slipping out, and just really messy job. So this makes it much easier. Just slide the bolt in, drive it in, and you're done. Now Z carriages, the same deal. I added these captive nuts so that you can just put the other part on the other side, put your screws in, drive them in. No need to worry about playing with pliers on the other side and lining things up. The nuts are already in their socket, already lined up, good to go. And while we're on this, oh, actually, no, that's a different part. We'll get to that later. Z end stop. These holes were a little too close to the edge, so I had to add a little bit more plastic to the edge to allow a better grab of the screw, or better bite of the screw into the plastic to hold these securely. So just a little bit more plastic here. Now XY joiner, again, captive nuts so that you can easily, without playing with the pliers from the other side, easily just put your other piece on, put the screw in, drive it in, and you're good to go. It's real easy. Same for these rods, same idea. Now this part, which goes on the other side of the XY joiner to hold your bearing securely, I had a little bit of a trouble printing it as originally designed, like so, sitting flat on the bed like this, because these overhangs here weren't printing very smoothly. So I decided to flip this part upside down like this and print it like this, which makes it print much nicer. And to do this, I had to fill in these corners, which in original design are cut off, kind of like here, where you have a little recess. So I had to fill in these corners and then make a hole for a screw. Actually, I intended to have this head of the screw go in, have a little recess for the head of the screw, but it appears that this hole that I put in here is a little too small, and the head of the screw does not go completely in. So I have to redesign that a little bit to make this opening a little bit bigger. But it prints much nicer like sitting like this on the bed. And then the Z nut holder. I've been waiting forever for Banggood to deliver me a set of threaded rod, smooth rod, or threaded rod that I can use that is unbent. Unfortunately, Banggood has a weird policy of using thin plastic bags and thin wrapping for whatever they ship, regardless of how delicate it is. So I've received a set of rods that was just bent in the shipping, and then a second set of rods that also was bent. Now I'm waiting for the third set of rods. And in the meantime, I really wanted to get to printing. So I decided to design this 9/16 nut holder for US locations. This is a 9/16 inch nut holder for 9/16 inch threaded rod, which is very close to 8mm threaded rod. And I think actually 8mm nut should fit in this as well. So I was able to start printing using my new printer without waiting for that rod that doesn't seem to be able to make it to me in one piece and in good shape, unbent. So these are the major changes that I made to this design, and I'll post all these parts. Maybe I'll make this correction here for the screw first, and then I'll post these parts on Thingiverse, so that if anyone likes the changes that I made, you can print them yourself and use them for your build. And one other thing actually that I'll mention is that I decided to use glass on top of my aluminum bed. And the problem with that is that original Z sensor, the inductive sensor, only has range of 4 millimeters, which is less than the thickness of my glass. So I had to, I actually found a sensor that has range of 8 millimeters, which is just barely enough to work with some offset above the position of the nozzle. So I was able to find the sensor, but it's much thicker. So I actually had to redesign this part to be bigger, have a bigger opening, so that this sensor fits. And also, actually I tried mounting the original sensor before I realized that it didn't have enough range. And so it's mounted in this holder with just one screw. And as the head was moving back and forth, this thing just wiggled its way out of position and collided with the hotbed and the print head, and it was just a big mess. So then I redesigned this part to also use the screw that's used to attach the air duct. So it's using two screws, the original screw that's holding this part, and also the screw for the air duct. So there are 2 points of connection, and that prevents it from rotating. Well, actually that was the idea. That didn't quite work out because the thickness of the wall that I used to attach to the air duct was just not enough, and this thing snapped right below the air duct. So I'll have to redesign this part to use a thicker wall, longer screws, and maybe some support in the back. I don't know if you can see how thin this wall here is, but it's actually very thin. So I'll make this wall a little bit thicker and maybe redesign this part to actually rest on some of these plastics, so that it's much harder for this thing to rotate. So that's another thing that I'll be changing in this original design. But other than that, awesome design. I really love it. I love the printer. It prints fantastic. It prints 24/7, and I'm really happy with how well this printer prints.